I told you.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ismail Mohammed. I'm the director for the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. On behalf of the Right to Speak project, I want to welcome you all to this evening session, the third in our series, which is specially designed for poets and people who work in this part of our creative economy or cultural economy. The Right to Speak project is presented jointly by the Center for Creative Arts and the Hear My Voice and Stand Foundation, and it is supported by the Goethe-Institut, the French Institute of South Africa, the Wallonie-Bruxelles, and the Representation of Flanders. I also want to acknowledge the work done by Kakaza Mohari, who is the coordinator of the project and who facilitates all the logistics for us at the Right to Speak project. The workshop that is presented today is a continuation of the series that started 2 days ago, where you've looked at financial management, you've looked at branding. What we're going to look at today is the challenge that most of us in the arts sector have, and that's the question of funding. And where do you seek funding from? And what is the funding environment and so forth? Today's workshop and tomorrow's workshop, in many ways, is a continuation in the sense that what I'm going to do today is I'm going to provide you with a broad overview of what I consider to be the basic elements that you need to understand in terms of being able to build funding partnerships. I welcome you to engage in the chat, to write comments, information that you would like to share with us. It'll be wonderful to also hear some of your achievements, challenges that you've had with fundraising for your projects or for your organizations. If you feel you need to have more clarity on some of the things I'm going to be talking about, please feel free to also engage. What we'd like is for the session to be quite interactive. I have two colleagues with me, Bash, who is controlling the logistics for us, and my colleague Siphindile Hlongwa, who many of you will know as the curator of the Poetry Africa, is working alongside with me today. And she is going to be continuing the discussion with you in the chat, prompting you, engaging with you, and also letting me know if there are particular aspects in the chat that I may not be seeing, but which I need to follow up and so forth. So with that, once again, thank you to Kakaza for putting it all together. Thank you to our partners, the Hear My Voice and the Stand Foundation, but mostly thank you to our funders for this particular project, which is the Goethe-Institut, the French Institute of South Africa, Wallonie-Bruxelles, and the Representation of Flanders through their respective offices in the EU who have made this possible. So let's kick off. I'm going to put up a slide which I'm going to take you through. And again, feel free to engage at any time around this issue of funding. What I'm going to draw on is the 35 years of experience that I've had working in the funding environment. And I've been fortunate in the sense that I've been able to look at funding from 2 points. One is the point of view of a person who's applying for funding, but I've also been able to look at it from the point of view of the person who is evaluating a funding proposal. So in the first of our 2 sessions on funding, we're going to be talking essentially around the funding environment and the funding landscape. So I'm going to let you know what are the kind of key objectives that we're going to try to cover in this particular session. Is that I'm going to look at the different kinds of funding partnerships that exist. I'm going to talk to you about certain kinds of words, because words have meaning. And when you're engaging with funders, you need to make sure that you use the right kinds of words. I'm going to talk about the ecosystem in which organizations function and what is it that you need to know to make your proposal attractive, interesting, and mostly your relationship with funders a healthy relationship. I'm going to offer you what I consider as the 18 basic principles through which you can enhance your relationship with funders or your project partners. And most importantly, I'm going to talk to you about how can you give your organization a human face so that you're not just another number in the fundraising list of applications, but that people begin to recognize your organization because it has a certain kind of brand identity, it has a certain kind of voice. But what I want to emphasize quite strongly is that working in the arts sector as a fundraiser, it's both a science and it's an art, because there are certain things that follow particular kinds of principles, which makes it a science. But there are other things which require a certain level of talent in order to be able to be successful as a fundraiser. So always think of yourself when you're working in this fundraising environment as somebody who works with it as a science and somebody who works with fundraising as an art. So let's kick off. Those are the kind of 4 objectives that I hope you'll be able to take out of this workshop. So let's look at the types of partnerships that you have when you create funding. And essentially, these are the ones that you need to know, is that you get sponsorships. And what is a sponsorship? How does a sponsorship differ from a subsidy? What is a subsidy and a grant? What are those 2 different things? Then what are donations and philanthropy? And how can you see subscriptions as a form of fundraising? And then the last aspect I will touch on, because you'll notice at the beginning of this workshop, I said we are supported by the Goethe-Institut, the Institute of French Institute of South Africa, Wallonie-Bruxelles, and the Representation of Flanders. So what is it you need to know with regard to embassy funding? But I also want you to understand 2 things. The one is that you can write as many funding proposals as you want. Sometimes you'll be lucky. At other times, you'll get a rejection letter. But you need to understand why you get those rejection letters. And a rejection letter should not make you angry, disappointed, or bitter, because it's the same like being a boxer in a boxing ring. You can throw as many punches, but finally you hit that one punch which gets it right there where you want it to hit. Likewise with funding, you'll send several proposals in, you'll get several rejection letters, but ultimately you'll get it spot on when you touch that nerve that funders want to have activated and so forth. Okay, but more importantly is that fundraising for the arts, and irrespective of whether you're working in theater or whether you're working in music or whether you're working in dance, or whether you're working in the poetry sector, it all depends on the kind of relationships that you build with your funder in order to be successful or to have challenges. Okay, so I said we're looking at sponsorship, we're looking at subsidies, we're looking at grants, we're looking at donations and philanthropy, subscriptions and embassy funding. And how do these differ from each other? So let's take them. But I'd also like to hear from you as I go along with each one, your comments and your feedback in the chat so that I know where we're heading to as we go along with this conversation. Okay, so let's take the first one, sponsorship. Some of you may have written sponsorship or you've secured sponsorship. What is a sponsorship? A sponsorship is essentially a trade agreement. And what this means is that you are going to be selling a service and somebody is going to buy that service from you. So for example, when Standard Bank sponsors the Jazz Festival in Makanda, Standard Bank, or let's even come closer, when Total sponsored the Poetry Africa Festival last year, it was a trade agreement. What is Total giving us and what are we giving back to Total? We sold them your logo will be on our collateral, on our marketing collateral. We will reach out to an audience of this particular demographic. We will be able to create so much of value for you in terms of marketing. And they evaluate all of that, and they give us a sponsorship that is relative to the kind of coverage that we are going to be able to give them. So a trade agreement is not an agreement, for example, the NAC or the DAC. It's essentially an agreement that you have with a corporate sponsor who is going to give you something in exchange, and that money could often come out of their marketing department. So what their marketing department will be asking you the question is, how many times are you going to use our logo? Where are you going to put our logo? How many people are going to see your logo, see the logo? Are you going to allow us some complimentaries for our key guests? And all those questions around what are you giving us in exchange for our sponsorship is a big, big question. Now, some of you may have applied for funding to the National Arts Council or to the DAC, and you can get away with putting the logo on just one little poster. With a corporate funder that gives you money out of their marketing department, you're not going to get away with that. They're going to ask for their logo to be big, bold, everywhere. And sometimes you are going to have to look at it in multiple ways in which you're able to create visibility for them, and that it is often target-based. Now, what I mean by this is that sometimes we get funding from government, like the NAC and others. We submit our reports, but we know what happens to those reports. They get filed, tick box, we've done it. With a corporate organization that is giving you sponsorship, your sponsorship report is going to be performance-based and assessed in that particular way. That what they're going to do is they're going to look at it in terms of the contract and ask themselves the question, you said you're going to reach out to 5,000 people. Did you reach out to 5,000 people? What proof can you give us that you reached out to 5,000 people? You said you would give us our logo on posters, programs, plus on screen. Did you do that? What evidence can you give to us? So with your corporate sponsorship, it's complex. You need to know that you need to have the energy and the capacity within your organization to enter into this kind of partnership where you will be able to deliver to your corporate sponsor and make sure that it is incredibly strong. Now, unless your money out of the corporate sponsor is coming out of CSI, and what I mean by CSI is that is it coming out of social responsibility. When it's coming out of social responsibility, because the corporate organization wants to do good, they will not be as hard and fast on that. What they're going to ask you for is the next block, is that what human story angles can you give us? So they're not interested in the statistics, but they're going to be asking you, how many lives did you transform? What are the nice things? How can we associate our brand with this particular organization? Are you doing good? Have you taught kids to play the violin? How many people, if you've been doing poetry about gender-based violence, can you tell us stories of young people who've come forward and said that they're not going to be committing violence against women or children and so forth? So that brand association for them is incredibly important. And it addresses the question that Luke Holder asked in the chat. That is, how important is corporate brand alignment with your product? It's important in two ways. One is that your product must reach out to what is going to be their potential audience or their potential consumer. Why are they funding you? They're funding you because they want to increase sales. They're funding you because they want to look, they want their product to be known. They're funding you because they want to look good as a corporate organization. So your organization must be professional. It must be able to reach out to what is their consumer base. Your kind of product must be aligned with the kind of quality product that they make and so forth. So brand alignment with a corporate sponsor is incredibly important, even if that alignment is going to be with the kind of human story angles that you want to sell. So for example, an organization, a corporate organization that says, we are at the top end of producing young leaders through our organization. Are you speaking that same language? Are you saying we are at the top end of producing young poets who are going to become the next generation of leaders? Now, When a trade agreement works incredibly well, you can be assured that that corporate organization is going to want to talk to you about going into a 2-year agreement or 3-year agreement and so forth. But there's a major risk, is that if their brand gets compromised in any particular way, either through content or through the way in which you create an identity for your organization, or somebody in the leadership of your organization saying something wrong and offensive on Facebook or any other social media, you're going to have the corporate organization saying, we don't want to be associated with that. We're canceling our sponsorship. And to give you a very good example of that, Steve Hofmeyer had incredible support from Toyota, from CakeNet, and a range of other organizations. But when Steve Hofmeyer began to come out and began to make racist arguments on his social media, and he began to present himself overtly as a racist, and it inflamed the mood and the feeling in the country, what did the corporate organizations who were sponsoring him do? They immediately withdrew their funding for sponsorship because it was damage to their brand association. They did not want to see him associated with them in any particular way. So this is something that you need to guard whenever you have a trade agreement, that you don't compromise your corporate sponsor. Because once you compromise your corporate sponsor, they are going to dump you. And there's the added risk. Like, for example, if you take Dance Umbrella. Dance Umbrella was funded for many, many years, for almost more than 20 years, by FNB. And when FNB ended their sponsorship agreement after 21 years, the footprint of FNB was so very, very big that it made it almost impossible for another corporate organization to step in immediately. Why? Because they would still work under the shadow of FNB. So what you need to do when you're working with corporate sponsors is not to go for just one, is to try to find different kinds of corporate sponsors, but not corporate sponsors that are in competition with each other. For example, you can't go and do a festival and say, we will get Standard Bank, Absa, and Nedbank to sponsor it. Why? They're three competitors. You can't have competition with brand association. But you can say, our leadership program will be sponsored by Standard Bank. Our workshop program will be sponsored by Absa, perhaps. So you can go for that because the competitions are not competing with each other on the same platform. Right, so that's a trade agreement, that's sponsorship. Let's get to the next one. The next one is subsidies. Now, subsidies is a complex word. Subsidies comes from political speak, from governments, because governments give you subsidies. Now, what you need to understand is that very often you will not get a subsidy as an individual, but your organization can get a subsidy. And you can get this from either national government, provincial government, or local government. But in order to be able to understand how you can get a subsidy, for example, the Joburg Ballet gets a subsidy from the Joburg City Council. The Cape Town Philharmonic Orchestra gets a subsidy from the City of Cape Town. The Philharmonic Orchestra in Durban gets a subsidy from the province and the city. But we, as the Center for the Creative Arts, also would get a subsidy sometimes from the City Council of Durban, right? But in order to be able to get a subsidy, what you need to understand is what is the government's strategic performance plan. And what I mean by that is that every year, every time there's an election, and this happens every 5 years, whether it happens at local government, provincial government, or at national government, governments set themselves targets. This is what we wish to achieve in the 5 years that we are going to be in government. And if the government says that we want to create a city or a town or a province that cares for its cultural workers, that is culturally active, you must step in immediately. You don't even wait for 3 months. You step in immediately. You figure out who in the government, in your local government or provincial government or national government, is responsible for culture and who made that particular statement. And you begin to ask yourself, what are we doing as an organization that is aligned with what government is doing, so that we can begin to say to them, can you give us a subsidy? And very often that subsidy is not around giving you a money for a play. Giving you money for a play, or giving you money for a festival, or giving you money for a once-off thing is a grant. But giving you a subsidy means that you will use that subsidy to be able to strengthen the capacity of your organization. So it's very different to a grant that a city council gives you, or a province gives you, or a national government gives you. Those are for programs, but a subsidy is to strengthen the capacity of your organization so that you can begin to do those kind of programs that you want to do. Okay, but you have to understand that when you submit a report, it is incredibly bureaucratic, and that you have to use the right kind of political speak and the right kind of political buzzwords in your report. Because when your report is tabled by the council to a council meeting, you are always going to have the opposition political parties raising lots and lots of questions about why you got that particular grant. Could they not have used that for housing? Could they not have used that for health? Could they not have used that for sanitation? Why throw R1 million or 500,000 rands towards arts and culture? So you need to use language like be able to say that the programs that our organization run contribute towards social development within our communities in the following ways. And you need to identify what that political speak is in terms of the government's own strategic performance plan. Now, what is the biggest risk to this kind of a relationship between you and local government? Is that we know very often governments have enormous challenges with governance, that they just don't operate sometimes optimally. So you may have a strong relationship with your municipality and you're getting funding in this particular administration, and then there's elections, and suddenly the next administration comes in and they don't care so much for arts, and they don't care so much for culture, and they just snap budgets for arts and culture. Or people within the municipality, officials change, and sometimes the official may not be the best person. But also poor governance on your part as an organization means that you could have your subsidy snapped off immediately. Now, the advantage of trying to get a subsidy is that very often with local government, provincial government, and national government, once you are on the subsidy list, it often is just a rollout effect. That when your 2 years or 3 years of the subsidy comes to an end, they will normally just send you a letter to let you know we need to renew the subsidy or whatever. So it's really good to try and get into that relationship with your local government, provincial government, and national government to try and secure the kind of subsidy, not for your programs, but to strengthen the capacity of your organization. Because when the capacity of your organization is strengthened, you can deliver programs. Okay, so it's a political compact. You need to think what's in the headspace of politicians and how do we as an organization reach that same target. Okay, now let's get to the next one, a grant. National Arts Council. Now, I know I hear this all the time. People would say, I submitted a proposal to the NAC and I had the best proposal and I didn't get the grant. I was using the top poets and I was going to use the top people in it, but I didn't get the grant. And you can sometimes write up a proposal and give the best names and the top names and so forth, but you will not get the grant. Why? Because you did not answer the question around a social compact. And what we mean by a social compact is that there has to be an outcome out of your grant that shows it benefits society. Because any kind of money that comes out of the taxpayer's purse cannot go to an organization that just wants to generate profits. It's got to go to an organization or to a project or to an artist whose work is going to improve the quality of society. The benefit must benefit society. So if you're just saying, we're going to do this great production because it has artistic excellence and we will be using the top names in the production, that proposal could end up in the bin. But if you say things like, we will be creating jobs, we will be addressing the issue of youth unemployment, we will be upskilling people, can you see? Those are all outcomes that are related to upliftment. And the taxpayers' money given to any organization must be related to how it uplifts society. if it's not going to provide that kind of an indicator, and this is why you will find when you fill in forms from the DAC and the NAC, they would ask you questions like, how many jobs are you going to create? How many men, how many women, how many disabled people are you going to reach out to? What is the area in which you're operating? Are you operating only in big cities like Johannesburg, or are you operating in areas where real development is needed? Okay, because it's a social compact, it must uplift society. Your project must be able to indicate that. And if you're not showing that in your NAC grants or your lottery grants or money that comes out of the taxpayers or from the public, you may not end up getting that grant. Okay, but you also have to show in addition to that, because everyone will tell you we addressing the issue of unemployment, we are working with gender-based organizations. You have to show that in addition to being able to service the needs of our community and in terms of being able to grow our community, we are also on the cutting edge of innovation. Now, I'm going to use a very good example here. I've always said it to hear my voice in our meetings, and I've also written about it on social media, and I've said it to them numerous times. The reason I enjoy working with them is that they are on the cutting edge of innovation. If you look at the way they're constantly evolving their programs, it's cutting edge. It's sometimes way ahead of other organizations. When we got into the COVID-19 space, they thought of that mobility fund. They thought of different ways of engaging people, so that being at the forefront is always great because it allows people to take note. It allows people to see you as a leader. You're not just doing all the nice things, but you are innovating, you are changing, you're at the front lines all the time. And is your organization doing that? If you apply for funding as an individual, are you constantly evolving? Are you on the cutting edge? Are you innovating and so forth? Okay. The primary objective, as I said, is that you must be able to reflect that your work is contributing to transformation, okay? And that its reporting structure is most successful when the funder is able to experience or witness the process of the project. Now, this is really crucial. As arts organization, we make the big mistake. We get funding and we allow people to then come and watch opening night. Do you ever send a report to your funder, sometimes just as a photograph, and say, day one, we are starting rehearsals. This is what our dressing room looks like. Day 7, everyone is off script. It's our first day learning, performing on stage without script. Day 8, we're doing a trial run. We're inviting the school. Day 11, we're going to do a run through. Is it possible for you to send somebody from your organization? So you don't wait for a report right at the end. You must be able to engage your partner as you go along. But you must also be able to show your partner in some way that you are constantly looking at your project, growing it, thinking about it, because the more your funder experiences the work that you're doing, the more they get behind the scenes, the more engaged, the more involved, the more they want to throw things at you and grow the project and grow things that you're doing. But what is the disadvantage of this kind of funding, of grants? And we know this in South Africa, is that very often grants are given to you as once-off projects. So you get a grant from the NAC and it's to do a project from this year and it has to be completed by March. So you do this incredibly wonderful project. But what's the big risk? You're not sure if you're going to be able to get money again the following year to do this project again, or whether you'll have continuity and so forth. So there is a limitation to trying to get grants. And what I say to people always is that a grant shouldn't be for your once-off project. A grant must be what you're going to seed, what you're going to grow, so that even when the grant goes away, the tree is still growing. And what is it that you're putting in to make that tree grow so that it slowly grows and some other funders can see, hey, we can get involved with this. We could become the branches. We could become the leaves. We could become the little fruit that attaches itself to that. Okay. I want to go back to another question that Luke asked. He says, is there any way for private enterprises to ever qualify for subsidies? Very rarely. Because the minute you give a private enterprise a subsidy, it's going to be, how did that corporate organization or how did that private enterprise get government funding? Who was the connection to government? Did government do an open tender process? all tenders have to be open. So no, as a private enterprise, you will not qualify for a subsidy because it's complex. It has to be a direct relationship with an organization that is either a Section 21, a registered organization, an institution, or a state agent, a partnership agency between state and the public. Okay. The next question is that what accountability and follow-up comes up from governments when money has been allocated? We know that that is hardly a case. We often end up getting reports that we send to government, and how often, whether it's the NSC or DAC, do they follow up? You know, we would write up and say, we've reached so many, we would like to continue this project for another 2 years. Does anyone respond? No. So that is the risk, that they often don't acknowledge the kind of reporting we do. So you have to begin to figure out in your own way. But what I do is, thanks, Luke, for these questions, but I encourage all of you, as we're going through these slides, ask the questions in the chat, because Siphindile is passing them on to me, and whatever's in your mind as we're going along, we can answer that as we go along. So don't wait right till the end. Take it as it comes along, and we can move forward as we go. Right. Now let's look at donations and acts of philanthropy. An act of philanthropy means somebody is giving you money, either in cash or in kind, a gift in kind, and they're doing it because they want to love what you're doing, or they're giving it out of the kindness. And what this, for me, is really an important way of donations. And I bring you to my own experiences. When I started off working in the arts, I was in my early 20s, about 21 or 22. And at that particular time, we had no grants because we lived in a different kind of South Africa where, you know, if you weren't white, you weren't going to get grants or subsidies or whatever. But I worked in a community who began to enjoy the kind of work that I was doing, who saw the value of my work. And I was very close in that community. So what I did is I built up a loyalty base of people who shared my values and who began to invest in the work that I was doing. Now, very often as arts people, we always try to look for money on the outskirts. We never look for who is it in my street that can contribute to the work that I'm doing. Who in my street can assist me with designing a poster? Because if I have somebody in my street or my community or in my company that I work in who can do that for me as an in-kind gift, that's one less thing that I need to raise money for. So you need to begin to work out as an artist a list of people who can give you things as in-kind contributions. But you also need to ask yourself, who are the people that you know that support your work that can ask you to be able to contribute as a cash donation? Now, to give you an example, Tobile Mapanga is a curator of the Jumba Festival that's organized by the Center for Creative Arts. Tobile Mapanga was invited to Canada last month to take part in the atelier. But because Tobile had built this incredibly wonderful relationship with everyone that comes to participate at Jumba, we did a Back a Buddy campaign for Tobile. And we made everyone that was involved with Jumba aware of this Back a Buddy campaign and of Tobile. And in less than the time that we had targeted in which we needed to raise money, everyone contributed to, because they shared Tobile's values, they shared the values of Jumba, they were loyal to Jumba, they were loyal to Tobile, who served them incredibly well, and they contributed from 100 rands to 5,000 rands, and they were able to help her achieve more than beyond the target. We were able to raise more than what we set as the target for her to be able to go to Canada to take part in there. But what we also did in drawing up that campaign is that we began to celebrate the human story. We told the story of this young woman who came out of the township, who went to get an education, who grew up becoming the assistant curator of this festival, who has dreams of wanting to participate in this international atelier, who wants to become a chief curator in the future. And people buy into the story, the human compassion story. And there's, in every single organization, you will have a good story to tell. So what I'd ask you to do is think about this. What is the good story that your organization can tell, that you can celebrate, that you will not write in your grants and sponsorship agreements, but you will take to begin to build the loyalty amongst your audiences, amongst your immediate close people, that when your organization needs to fund somebody to go on a trip, it's going to be your loyal audience who will say, I'll give you 100 rands, or I'll give you 200 rands, or I'll contribute, towards your per diems for one day, or whatever. So build this database of philanthropists for your work and for your organization. Don't always look at grants. Grants are limiting. Philanthropists stay with you because they buy into a relationship between you. And greatest of all is that it doesn't require a 20-page reporting. All you need to do is to say, thank you for your wonderful contribution to our work. This is how we're going to be using the money. And at the end of that, all you do is to say, thank you for the contribution that you made. Here's a photograph of the project that we developed. And it's simple. It takes away all that complex reporting and whatever. And if you build a wonderful database, now some of you may know Mike van Graan, policymaker, playwright, activist, and whatever. Mike van Graan has been an expert at building a loyalty of philanthropists, that every time he does a play, those philanthropists contribute towards his play. If you look at Siphindile Hlongwa, who's doing a musical show, Siphindile asks the question to people, if you can't come, can you contribute towards buying tickets that we can give to people? Those are acts of philanthropy that generate income as well. Okay, but what you have to understand in this loyalty base is that if you act dishonestly, or if your philanthropist who gives you any kind of contribution feels that they cannot trust you, that's the end of you. Because not only will they stop paying you or paying towards your organization and making donations to the organization, they will share that information in their networks. They will say, we contributed to that project, but they didn't use the money as intended. They instead had a Christmas party, or they didn't take the kid to the excursion that he was supposed to go on. This is what they use the money for. So loyalty, honesty, and the relationship of engagement with your philanthropist is really, really important. Okay, so what kind of projects might be acceptable? Which acts of philanthropy, what might be an acceptable expectation from the donor? Do they have any agency of the production you create? No, because remember, when they giving you a contribution, they're buying into the values of your organization. When I was at the Market Theatre, we wanted to start a library for the students at the Market Theatre Laboratory. And what we asked for is contribution of books. And we got lots and lots of books. But then exclusive books came on and they said, we want to start the Pan-African Library in Hillbrow. No expectations, no requirements of big marketing and branding and all of that. Why did they do that? They shared our values of extending leadership. Of course, they knew if 10 people begin to read books, that's potentially 10 people who are going to want to buy books and so forth. Okay, but loyalty and relationship and trust is really important in terms of philanthropy. And what happens is that when one philanthropist gives to you, that philanthropist will tell that good story at the dinner table, and they will become the ambassadors for your organization, who may be able to get 10 other people to sponsor. How did the Stand Foundation start off? The Stand Foundation did not start off with any grants. The Stand Foundation started off with people who shared a common value and who each said, we can contribute towards so much towards the start of the organization. And what they then did is began to share that message around, and people began to contribute from 1,000 rands to 10,000 rands, not wanting anything, only wanting to know that the money that they're going to give to us is going to be going for the good of the work that we do as an organization. And that's where our philanthropy differs from grants. There's no application. There's sharing, selling your integrity. And when you say and sell your integrity, people buy into it. It's unlike the grant or subsidy or corporate type of fundraising that you do. Are we all fine with this? Shall we move on to the next slide? Now, the subscription or the loyalty ticket, again, this is something which very, very few organizations do. And this is, if you know as an organization, and now that we're coming out of COVID-19, this is something that you need to think about. When I was at the National Arts Festival, this is something that I pushed quite a lot in terms of the programming that I did there, is that if you have a loyal member, how do you get the loyal member to buy more than just one ticket? How do you begin to get them a subscriber of your work? So that, you know, if they contribute, you're saying to them, you buy a ticket for a whole season. So if, for example, Poetry Africa is going to have a festival and we're going to say, we're going to sell tickets at 20 rands per event. But if people buy a subscription ticket for the entire festival, they only pay 12 rands per ticket. What are we doing? We're giving them that. But what are we doing is that we're understanding who is our target audience. What are we going to, how are we going to reach out to them? Are we going to take them on and build them into our database? So the next time we do a show, we send them out. Now, building a database is incredibly important, because if you don't build your database, how are you going to be able to build loyalty? How are you going to get those people back? So very often in arts organizations, we have an event, but do we ever go at that event and have somebody targeted and say, hey, you know what? I saw Kakaza at my event. I saw Ismail at my event. I saw Mo Africa at my event. I got their details, I got their stuff added into my database, and we will make sure that we send them information so that when we know we have the next event, they're probably going to buy a ticket. So growing your database, growing your subscriber base is incredibly important, not just for selling loyalty tickets, but it also becomes incredibly important when you go to a corporate sponsor, because a corporate sponsor is going to ask you the following questions. Have you market researched your audience? Do you know who the audience is? Do you know the demographic of your audience? But the next thing, they're going to get deeper down. How many subscribers have you got? How many people do you have in your database? How many followers do you have on Facebook? How many followers do you have on Instagram? What other channels are you using? How many people do you have there? So building that is incredibly important, because it's going to assist you to be able to sell your organization later on. And it's also a good way to keep all those subscribers invested with information and so forth. And great is that you don't have to send a report to them at the end of the project. They've experienced it. They've come to your show. They understand what you've been doing. But what's the risk is that suddenly if you start spamming them, they're going to freeze, they're going to mute you. So you need to build information for your subscription or your database very, very cautiously. You'll say, we'll send out a WhatsApp message to everyone on the database only once a week. We'll send a newsletter only once a month. We're not going to send them 3 letters a day. Or you're also going to watch, I haven't duplicated this person's name in my database, so he ends up getting 5 emails of the same thing. Because the minute I get 5 emails from the same organization about the same thing, I immediately block them. Why? Because it's an irritation, right? So you need to make sure that your subscription base does not disengage with you, because then you're losing them. You're losing the possibility that they'll buy your ticket. And buying a ticket is a form of funding. It's self-generated income. Okay, let's get to the next one, embassy funding. This is very interesting, because embassy funding is really not funding in the normal sense, because embassies are not funding agencies, okay? But embassies have money to spend. And the reason they spend their money is because they want to achieve 2 basic goals. They want to understand, extend what they call public diplomacy, and the second one is cultural diplomacy. Now let's talk about that. When an embassy is established in South Africa, that embassy has a particular objective around why it wants to be in South Africa. That objective is around trade. That objective is around extending its identity, extending its cultural legacy, extending its diplomatic engagements with our country, and so forth. So what you need to do is, you can't just blindly write, hey, we're doing this project, let's go and ask the Goethe-Institut for money. Or, hey, we're doing this project, let's go and ask the French. You have to understand, you have to go to the website of the Goethe-Institut and the French Institute, or for example, the British Council or the Dutch Embassy, and you could ask yourself, what is their public diplomacy objective? Their public diplomacy objective will be, we want to grow trade. We want to grow understanding between our two nations. We are interested in development of women leadership. We are interested in engaging with youth audiences around better governance and so forth. So if you begin to understand that, what you then begin to say is, how is our cultural program going to be aligned with what that government intends to achieve? Now take this project, Right to Speak. What is Right to Speak? Right to Speak is, one, a celebration of the freedoms that we have entrenched in our constitution. And the four partners that we have all have it written somewhere in their constitution and somewhere in their own mission that they support freedom of expression and freedom of creativity. That's what Right to Speak is about. But it's not just speaking out in any particular way. It is speaking out with responsibility. Okay, that's what they're talking about. But it's also about how do we work with poets whose voices contribute towards social change, the broadening of our democracy, and the preservation of our human rights. So all those embassy, those four partners that we have from diplomatic missions, all of that is part of their international diplomacy objectives. And therefore, they create this cultural program that they're going to fund, which supports that diplomatic agenda that they have. Okay. But it also means that you constantly have to think, if you're going to get money from the French, is there any content that we have that is French? Are we presenting any French artists in our program? If you're going to get money from, example, the Germans, the Goethe, is that what content of ours is related, if apart from the diplomacy objectives, is there any content we're using? Are we using poems from Germany? Are we integrating a poet who comes from Germany in our program? Is there a South African who speaks German? Because you don't always have money for flights and accommodation and per diems, but you find somebody locally who could work with that language, with that culture, and whatever, to be able to do that. And that any kind of a relationship like that has to contribute towards broadening, strengthening the relationship between South Africa and that particular country. So when these four diplomatic missions contribute towards the Right to Speak project, yes, they know as young people and as poets, you are going to speak about the social challenges and the failures in our political leadership and so forth. But it's not aggressive. It's not counterproductive. It is about contributing to the broader dialogue around strengthening democracies, the broader dialogue around how do we build more transformed societies? How can we strengthen the relationship and the exchanges between our countries and so forth? But you also have to understand that when you get money from any one of these cultural embassies and so forth, that your reporting is going to be very, very complex. It's not going to be just an easy way of getting it. You are going to have to report in particular templates, and very often they would give you templates by which you got to do your reporting. Okay, but you also have to understand that this is not sustainable funding. For example, we've got funding now from 4 embassies for the Right to Speak project, but there's no guarantee that the Right to Speak project will continue next year with the same levels of funding. Perhaps us as partners will talk at the end of this project, how do we sustain some of the things we've started off, and how can we take on some of those things and share with our own available resources and so forth. So it's project-based, but also you have to understand that governments change their agendas, their diplomatic agendas. So, you know, for this year, it may be we want to work with youth. The next year, their foreign affairs department will say, guys, we need to shift. We need to look at this particular aspect. And the cultural embassies, the embassies will change their cultural diplomacy programs to be able to move in that particular direction. Now, here's a lovely question that comes up in the chat. And it says, is being third world economic players is being the third world economic players have sympathetic impact on embassy funding, or is more aligned with philosophy and pedagogy? I think it's a combination of both. There was a time before 1994, and I say this because I worked in the embassy in the early years, is that we gave money probably because we liked the projects and we liked the development aspects of those particular projects. And we seldom asked the question, what is it doing to strengthen the relationship between our two countries? And now those agencies, those very same embassies are asking that more constantly. We're not going to just throw money because we know the money is constrained, but we're going to ask the question of what is it doing to be able to strengthen the capacity of the work that we're doing and so forth. And sometimes it's aligned to philosophy, it's aligned to pedagogy. And I'll give you an example. When the Netherlands embassy sponsored the Artfluence Human Rights Festival presented by the Center for Creative Arts last year, why did they buy into that? Because we sold them the idea that almost 30 years ago in the Netherlands, during the fight against apartheid, the people of Netherlands had the strongest anti-apartheid movement in Amsterdam and so forth. And that 30 years ago, a South African cultural festival was banned in South Africa by the nationalist government. And 30 years later, we want to reflect on that, but we want to reflect on the relationship that existed between South Africans and the Dutch people during the anti-apartheid movement and how that solidarity continues to prevail even in the present time. Now, that is philosophy. That is around a whole range of other things. It's not around, we want to do this because we're going to reach out to so many Dutch artists and we're going to have so many different kinds of programs. It's around a deeper kind of philosophical thinking that allowed that relationship to happen. Okay? I hope that answers the question, but it's a lovely question. It's a really important question, is that you have to understand, it's very complex, of all the funding that you work with, whether it's the subsidies or grants or corporate, cultural diplomacy funding as most complex. You have to begin to constantly ask yourself, you have to know, and you also have to know who's the key person in that organization, in that embassy. Because one of the risks with embassy funding is that every 3 years, the person at the top of the organization, the ambassador or the cultural attaché, leaves and they go to another country. So who is the South African person within that embassy that will be your network, that will be your connector, that will introduce you to the next ambassador when he comes in? So you have to know those kind of things in the way you build those particular relationships with embassies. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide now. Now, before you begin to engage with any kind of funding, you're coming here, you're saying, we're coming to this workshop, we want to know how to get funding and so forth. You have to understand the ecosystem in which your organization functions. Whether it's a small organization, whether it's a 3-person organization, or whether it's you as an individual artist, or whether it's a big institution like ours within a university environment, you operate within a particular kind of ecosystem. And you need to know who is in that universe with you. Because when you know who is in that universe with you, you'll be able to know how you go forward. So every year, what you need to do as an organization is that you need to take stock. Business does that. They take stock at the end of every year. They figure out what goods have been on our shelves, what goods have not sold, what are the new trademarks that have come in, which ones go well. How often is it as an organization, as an arts organization, that we take stock of our ecosystem? If we did, we probably would run at a much faster pace. So how do you do this? How do you take stock? Let's look at the next slide. Is that you create a template for yourself and you ask yourself the question, who are all the people in our industry? That's the people we play with, the artists. So in our ecosystem, it's Hear My Voice, it's Word and Sound, it's all the other poetry organizations, it's people who make theater, it's the theaters, it's the audiences, it's the managements, it's organizations like Stand, it's Stada, it's all the other people, it's interns, it's service providers, it's agents, all the people in your industry. And you make a list of all those people in your industry. Because then you can go, you can say, we know who our potential partners are going to be, right? Then you go, who are the potential enablers in your organization? And what I mean by this here is that you ask yourself, who are the people that exist in our environment? Who are the different funders that are in our town, in our province, in our country, in externally and so on? Who are the local government people that we know? Do I have a network in local government? Do I know somebody? Who are the local businesses that you work with? And this is crucial. And I'll give you an example. When I worked in Witbank, Mpumalanga, we started a Witbank Civic Youth Theatre Company. Our immediate sponsors was a local business. When I worked with the festival in, what is it called? Somewhere in the Northern Cape, small little festival that started off there. The biggest sponsor was the Spa, which gave them 5,000 rands. Now in a small village, 5,000 rands is great because that same Spa gets requests from the school, from the church, from the local organizations, and they don't make millions of rands like a Spa in the city, but they give you the 5,000 rands, which allows you to be able to go to Barca for a matching grant, but which allows you to tell a celebratory good news story about a small business on the corner of your town contributed towards the development of your organization. Who are the citizens, those philanthropists? Who are the media people? Do you have context in the media that when you get a sponsorship, when you get a funding, when you get a grant from anyone, that you can go to some media person who's going to write that story, that positive story? Who are the schools in your organization who can allow you to use their spaces for rehearsals or for your outreach work or whatever? Because very often your grant maker will ask you, how many schools are you going to reach out to? Are you doing development work? Who are the civic organizations? So who are all the people that can assist you in some way or the other? And what is it they're assisting you with? Okay. Then you take a copy of your infrastructure and you begin to ask yourself, what are the resources that we have in our town? The venues that we have? What is the seating capacity? What access do we have to digital equipment, technology? If we do a show and we sell tickets, are we using web ticket, Quicket, or whatever? If we're going to say we're going to be doing a show in the city center, what transport access do we have? What transport access do our audiences have? Is the venue secure? Are the people going to be safe in that particular space? And then you ask yourself the questions, what are the inhibitors? What are the things that can impact and be a risk? Climate. So if you're planning a big outdoor event, have you taken into consideration that we could just have bad rainy weather during that time and it could impact on us? And if suddenly we cancel, our funder will not come back on board again, right? Geography, that is, how far is this project? You know, can we're planning here in Joburg or we in Durban, can we realistically plan an event in Petersburg? Do we have the know-how? Is that city close enough for us to be able to engage in? You have to understand the economics of the people that you're working with, because you're going to get funding for a production. Your funder is going to want to know how many audiences you reached. Can the people afford to buy the tickets? Or are you going to say, we're going to do this project, but we will be giving complimentary tickets because of? You have to understand the politics within which your organization exists. You have to understand the religion of the people that you're working with, the education. You need to understand the way they engage in terms of communications. So if you understand all of this, it allows you to be able to structure your funding proposal in a way where you'll be addressing all these different questions and being able to convince your funder that you've taken stock of your ecosystem and that you are going to be able to create the kind of program that you really think is going to be successful. Now, how does this help you to start off the first part of your funding proposal? When you write a funding proposal, we all know that the first thing you have to do is that you have to show your funder in some way or the other how sustainable your project is going to be. And the only way you can do that is that if you can use all the infrastructure that you have in that column to connect the people, the players, with enablers, and you know how to overcome your inhibitors so that you can have success, growth, and prosperity. So if you take that stock, you'll be able to say, these are the resources that we have. These are the people that we can work with. These are the enabling conditions that we have to achieve the kind of success that we want to achieve. But we are conscious of the following inhibitors and the following risks, but this is how we plan to mitigate that. Okay, so let's take this as a concrete example now. Your mission statement. You said you got your environment, you got your enablers, you got your resources, and you got your project objectives. So I would say my environment is that in my environment, we know there's high risks of gender-based violence amongst South African youth. That's negative. But what is the positive in my environment? The positive in my environment is I'm dealing with slam poets who are incredible influences, right? Slam poets who are incredible influences. So can I take my environment, the positive and the negative, and put that together? So I say yes. Recognizing the increase in gender-based violence among South African youth and the impact of slam poets as influencers. I'm going to my neighbors, the Center for Creative Arts, through the Poetry Africa Festival and supported by the gender unit at UKZN. So who am I working with? I'm not just working on my own as a center, I'm working with a platform, Poetry Africa Festival. I'm working with another enabler, gender unit, because if I want to address the issues of gender-based violence, I may work with poets, but not all poets know the issues around gender-based violence. But if I work with the gender unit, they can be able to provide me with the professional expertise, with the real issues, the stats, the kind of counseling, the real things that we need to have, the networks, the information, the deeper content, and so forth. Okay, so what will we do? Recognizing the increase in gender-based violence among South African youth and the impact of slam poets as influencers, the Center for Creative Arts through the Poetry Africa Festival and supported by the gender unit at UKZN will develop and promote a slam poetry project performed by professional poets who are youth influencers to tour to local inner city schools, community centers, and libraries. Can you see how I'm expanding? I know my environment, the positive and the negative. I'm going to address the negative by using these positives. Who are my enablers? They're going to assist me. And what are the resources that I'm going to use in order to achieve this objective? I'm going to use a slam poetry project. I'm going to use professional poets. I'm going to use youth influencers. I'm going to use inner city schools, communities, and libraries. Can you see how I'm expanding my mission statement by gradually taking my funder through certain levels of thinking, by letting them know what is the big issue, what's the great advantage that I have, who am I going to be working with, what are the partners, and added the spider web that's going to grow with who I'm going to be working, the additional things. Finally, to raise awareness and empower schools to develop gender watch committees that can curb harassment and violence at schools. Now, the project objective for me is crucial because what you want to do is you want to begin to show that your project is not just another project of doing another program on gender-based violence. And we see lots of that. But we're going to do a gender-based project that's going to have an outcome. What is our outcome? We want to develop gender watch school committees. That's an outcome. That's an impact. That's going to be lasting. So that after we've done our poetry project at the school about gender-based violence, and we all get this wonderful applause, we don't just walk away, but we get this really impactful thing that the school student committee or the school itself establishes a gender watch school committee that will be constantly doing the work when you leave as poets from that performance. Okay, so you must always ask yourself, is your mission statement stating something that will be left as legacy or as impact or as something that is a little more sustainable? Okay, there's another question that comes up in the chat. How can legitimate enablers assist with perceptions and branding issues within your immediate community? 100%. Absolutely beautiful question, because legitimate enablers can assist with positioning you correctly. So if I said, we at the Center for Creative Arts at the UKZN want to do a program with poets around gender-based violence, but we're going to work with the gender unit at UKZN, what does it do? It immediately tells everyone that we're going to work from a point of information. We're going to work with professionals. We are going to work in a critical environment. We are going to be working intellectually. We are going to possibly end up with research methodology. We are going to have an impact on maybe gender unit at university, influencing the policy within the university environment. So your enablers must be able to create advantages for you. You don't just go and tick a box, like go there, we're going to do a project with gender violence, and you're going to look for the first organization that does work with gender. No, it's not a tick box exercise. It must be, how will that organization make you look good? How will that organization contribute to that content? How will that your association with that particular organization help you to be able to access other partners, able to access other potential funding, and so forth? And very often your enablers are the ones who open bigger doors for you. Okay? So what I'd like you to do is that you'll find this as a struggle initially if you've never written proposals, because the very first thing you have to do in any kind of funding proposal, even if you do the one that's the NEC GMS grant management system thing, you have to write what is your mission statement. So the more you begin to practice this, and if you've created that template where you've drawn up your environment, your enablers, your resources, and your inhibitors, you will be able to create this. Now, don't worry about writing this down, because everyone will get a copy of this workshop presentation at the end of the session. So you'll be able to constantly refer to it as you go along and develop your things, and as you begin to create your stock take register for your organization, as you play around with your thing. But key thing in drawing up your mission statement is to ask yourself, what is our problem statement? And who do we have to address that problem statement? So right to the top, my problem statement is gender-based violence. What's my great advantage? I have South African youth, slam poets who are magnificent influences. Their voices are powerful. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, then I go to the next questions and so forth as you go along, and you develop this kind of mission statement that you want, that you're creating, and so forth. Okay, so let's move from there. Now, these I'm going to go through quite fast, but feel free to interrogate, feel free to ask questions, and so forth. These are 18 points that I feel are incredibly important, because you can write the best proposal, you can put the most smartest names to your project. But if you don't fulfill these 18 basic principles, you're not going to be able to develop a sustainable relationship with your partner. So let's go through these principles one by one. Partnerships require a legal framework. So it's as much as you have a relationship, it has to be a legal framework. You must be able to meet certain compliance and controls and accountability. You must be able to enter into a contract. You must know who in your organization is going to sign the contract. Do you have a bank account so that you're not just funding money today into my account and tomorrow into Siphindile's account, and tomorrow the payments will be made from Kaka's account, and the following thing will be paid out of Ishmael's account, or Pomola's account, or Africa's account. You must have a legal structure as a framework. And this became incredibly important during the PSP, when you began to find out that the majority of artists were not even registered for taxes with SARS. So if you are working as a freelance artist, ask yourself, am I a legal entity? Am I registered as a worker? And do I have a SARS number? If I'm an organization, is my organization a Section 21 company? Is it a Section 18 company? Is it an organization not for profit? If you're part of an institution, what is the relationship with your organization, with your institution, in terms of the kind of legal status of your organization that's going to apply for funding? Okay, principle number 2, every partnership requires clarity. And by this, what I mean is that you can't be everything to everyone. You have to set yourself attainable goals, because your funder is going to hold you accountable to it. So you can't wake up one morning and say, we're going to address gender violence, and tomorrow we're going to address climate change, and the next day we're going to address the youth crisis of unemployment, and so forth. You must have a clear focus. You must be able to say, as an artist and organization, these are the issues that I want to campaign for. This is where I want my voice as a poet to be heard. I'm not going to be the poet that speaks about everything. I can't be everything to everyone. But yes, as a poet, I will speak on the following 5 core issues. And what are your 5 core issues as a poet? What is your level of activism? What are the things you're passionate about? Because if you're not passionate about that, you can't sound real. So don't be everything to everyone. Set yourself attainable goals. You want to work in the field of youth, addressing youth issues. You want your poetry to talk to issues of gender-based violence. You want your poetry to talk to broader issues of social justice. You want your poetry to create understanding of indigenous languages. You want your poetry to be able to do A, B, and C. Identify what your target is and build that. You can do that through multiple different projects, right? You can do it, you can say, our commitment is to social justice. We can do it through the Art Fluence Festival. We can do it through the Poetry Africa. We can do it through Time of the Writer. But we're not saying we have to do all these different things. Sometimes as an artist and sometimes as an arts organization, you must be able to say, no, that is not our space. You have to say that, because when you try to go wrong into the wrong space and you think you'll do it because somebody's going to give you 10,000 rands as a small grant, and you end up doing it, but you do it as a mess, you can forget that any funder who works in that particular sector will want to partner with you. Why? Because you created a crappy program. So don't be the be-all, end-all, and everything for everyone. Target what you want to achieve. Target the voice that you want to create for yourself as an arts person, and work on developing that, rather the one or two than the multiple voices that you think you need to be relevant in. Okay. Partnerships are part of an organizational strategy. And this means it's part of the broader vision. So you can't, every time you apply for funding, go and ask yourself, what's our vision as an organization? You have to think of your vision as an organization over 3 years or for 5 years. And you must be able to develop what is it that we want to do as an organization in 3 years' time, in 2 years' time, and 5 years. When I arrived at the Center for Creative Arts, and before the end of my first year, I arrived there in November. Before the end of November, I convened a meeting with the entire staff. And I said, think big, think blue sky. Where do you want to see our organization in 5 years' time? What are the kind of projects you want us to be able to do in 5 years' time? Who are the potential partners that we will work with in 5 years' time? And once we established that this is where we want to be in 5 years' time, we began to ask ourselves the next question. How do we get that to that point from in year one? What is that we need to do in year one to be able to get there? What is that we need to do in year two in order to be able to get to the next level? What is that we need to do in year three? What is that we need to do in year four? And what is that we need to do in year five? Because if you've worked that out, in your funding proposals, you will indicate that we are an organization with a 5-year plan, and we intend to achieve this over the next 5 years through the following: year one, year two, year three, year four, and year five. What does it do to your funder? It allows your funder to see you're thinking big. It allows your funder to see that you have bigger development and strategic plans. It allows your funder to begin to experience the kind of thinking that is happening within your organization. So you're not just the kind of organization we're doing grant, project. But every grant is building towards the next thing. Every project is building to the next bigger project. And your funder must be able to see that growth and see that and experience that with you, because then they become even more engaged with not just building your little project, but they get more engaged with building your organization. And that's what you want. You want your funders to become involved with strengthening the capacity of your organization. Not just the project you're doing, but you want them to become involved with strengthening the capacity of your organization. Now, when I worked at the National Arts Festival, Standard Bank was one of our funders. And we began to engage with Standard Bank at a level where not just around the programs that we did. How do we keep them informed about what is our 3-year plan? What is our 5-year plan? And Tony Lancaster was the CEO, and I worked hand in hand so that our artistic outputs must be aligned with what our organizational outputs are, and so forth. And that is what we sell to our funder. So you're not selling your funder just the projects that you're doing, but you're selling them the bigger vision of your organization. How is your organization going to grow, and how do you want them to grow with you, and so forth as well? Okay, you have to begin to think for the long term. When you get a funder, you don't want them just as a one-off funder. You want them to stay with you for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And what is it that you're going to do to establish that relationship? Are you letting them understand what your plans are? Are you letting them into the inner workings of your organization, and so forth? The more they begin to understand that, the longer you're going to keep that partner for a longer term. Okay. Partnerships are regulated for accountability. And it doesn't matter, like I said, whether it's a philanthropist who gives you a donation and is expecting a letter of thanks, or whether it's a corporate funder who's going to ask you for particular kinds of stats, or whether it's a subsidy from government that's going to ask you particular things. All partnerships must be accountable. You must be able to submit a report according to the templates, according to the requirements, or just an ordinary letter of thanks and so forth. But it also depends on all those things that are written into that agreement between you and the funder about the way you will answer or how you will be accountable to the partnership. Okay. Partnerships require leadership. Now, this is very crucial. In our organization, although I may be the director of the organization, I'm not the only leader of the organization. I'm the leader of the organization in terms of hierarchy. I'm the leader of the organization in terms of bureaucracy. But every person in my organization must be a leader. And again, I'm going to use the example of Hear My Voice. Because when I take Hear My Voice, I see three individuals. I see Pomolo, I see Ismail, and I see Mo Africa. And I've learned very strategically, when I engage with them in meetings, I know very, very clearly, in this meeting, Ismail is going to be the one who's going to be the spokesperson. In that meeting, Pomolo will be the one who will be leading the questions. In this particular meeting, I know it's going to be Mo Africa who's leading the questions. So within your organization, you need to ask yourself, who are the different leaders? And how do you begin to grow the leadership of every single person? So that we're not just seen as one person hangs there, because that could become a threat to a funder, because they'll always ask this question. So what happens if Ismail leaves? Will Hear My Voice still exist? If Ismail suddenly gets married and moves to Canada, will Hear My Voice exist? Yes, because Mo Africa and Pomolo share the vision. They'll continue it. And Ismail may become their foreign person living and working from there. So grow the leadership of your organization. It's like the thing I do at the Center for Creative Arts. I may be the organizational leader, but Siphindile knows every project. If I'm not there, she knows exactly the answers, the questions, can engage with our stakeholders. And the more we begin to diverse that kind of leadership, the more diverse our pool of partners is going to come, because I come with a particular kind of pool of partners. Siphindile comes with a particular kind of pool of partners. The next person in our organization comes with a different kind of pool of partners. So you're growing your partnership base because the leadership in your organization is also diverse. It's not hanging on one particular person all the time. Okay. Multiple partners are fun. And I've spoken about this, for example, when I gave you the example of Dance Umbrella. That is, if Dance Umbrella had more than one partner, not just F&B, Dance Umbrella would not have found itself in the crisis. But because it only had F&B, when F&B pulled out, it found itself in crisis. So try to ask yourself, can you get multiple partners? Why is the Right to Speak project so very, very exciting? Because it's us. It's Hear My Voice. We're two different organizations. We share common visions around certain things. But we also know that Hear My Voice does A, B, and C incredibly well. Center for Creative Arts with Poetry Africa does D, E, and F incredibly well. Kakasa is the next partner who comes in with a different set of skills and does A, B, and C incredibly well. This is what Goethe-Institut comes in with as a part. That's what French Institute comes with in. So try to create projects where you're bringing in multiple partners, because multiple partners also give you multiple audiences. Multiple audiences give you multiple stakeholders. Multiple stakeholders will give you multiple philanthropists. It has a spinner effect on everything that you end up doing. So don't just always go for just that one partner that you want to work with and think it's all going to be nice and so forth. Okay. There's a question here. What is a realistic time frame to work backwards from? How do you prioritize these plans if your funds require immediate success matrix? Success can be measured in multiple ways. At the end of this workshop, we will do a poll. If one person in this poll says, I figured out just one thing tonight about how to write a mission statement, something I never knew, then that workshop has touched one person at that particular level. So within your organization, you measure success by multiple factors. Don't only measure success by we got 1,000 people to come. And this is where organizations make the big mistake, because they think numbers is a measure of success. Numbers is not a measure of success. Success is measured by how you change people's lives, or who's been touched by the work you do, or who's going to become a loyal partner. So you may touch 5 people with this project. What are they doing? Are they engaging with you further? And so forth. So measure that in success in different ways. You know, when you're talking to a corporate, of course, we said numbers is what they're interested in. When you're talking to a grant maker, which is public, what is the social impacts that you've made? Tell those stories. So success is measured in different ways, depending on who your grant maker is and what is written in the contract in terms of the way they wish to measure success or delivery of your project. And to give you an example, with the Right to Speak project, we said we would have Center for Creative Arts do this project and that project, and Hear My Voice would do this and that, and Kakasa would deliver A, B, and C. And at the end of this project, we will do an evaluation, but in the middle of the project as well, we will assess and we'll evaluate. And our targets were, we will do a series of workshops, which we're currently doing. At the end of this series, we will ask ourselves, did we achieve what we set out to do? Did we impact on the arts sector in the way that we thought we would do? So success is measured on multiple forms of matrices, not only one. Okay. Partnerships are about people. This is the most important thing for me. If I get a contract, that's great. If I send a report, that's great. But if I've not engaged my partner and brought them into my work and allowed them to experience my work, that engagement with my partner is merely clinical. And at some point they'll go like, oh, we've done that, we've gone. But if they understand who I am, they understand the work we're doing, they understand and come to our rehearsals, they come to our closing events, all of that, the engagement, how often are you communicating with your partner? And it's not that kind of sharing recipes and so forth, but that kind of strategic conversation that you're having. That is going to be so much more important in terms of strengthening your partner than giving them a big logo on the poster, which ultimately gets faded out of their memory. But if they have a wonderful relationship with you, they'll remember that and they'll carry that on and they will talk about you and they will create additional partnership relationships for you. So people are far more important than the contracts in any kind of a partnership agreement. Who are the people behind that? Who are the people managing it? Who are the people I'm going to be interfacing with them? How am I working with them? And so forth. Okay. Partnership is a two-way street. It's how do you engage with your partner and how do they engage with you? This is crucial because when you have a partner that is invested in your work, they're going to want to help to build your capacity. They're going to introduce you to their networks. They're going to bring other opportunities to you. When a funding for another kind of grant goes open, because you've had this wonderful relationship with them, they'll email you and say, hey, listen, you may want to consider this new grant program that's coming up. So establish that relationship with your funder. Don't just wait and say, oh, I'll wait and see when they do the next call out and then I'll submit my proposal. No. Are you constantly visiting them, their website? Are you building a relationship with them? It's crucial because then you end up on the database. Then you end up with their trust relationship. They'll share information with you and you can share information with them and they will share that on their website with their audiences and so forth. Keep it engaged all the time. Partnerships require a full team to support it. Yes, as the organization head at the CCA, I will sign the documentation, I'll write the proposals, I'll be the frontline person and so forth. But more than anything else, I should always have an entire team that knows who the people are. So if, for example, the Goethe-Institut comes to Durban, IFAS comes to Durban, even the junior clerk in my office must know that is IFAS, that is Goethe. They are our partners. It's not staying in just the CEO's office or the executive's office, but everyone in your organization must know who your partner is. Because when you strengthen an arm, the arm works. You strengthen the heart, the whole body works. Now, what I do is that every time we secure funding at the Center for Creative Arts, I send an email to every single member of our team. And I say, we've secured funding from this particular organization for this particular project, and this is the amount. But I don't just send it to my team. I send it to the university leadership as well. Why? Because if they're understanding what we're doing at the Center for the Creative Arts and we're raising the kind of money, they will begin to recognize the work we do and they will also begin to support us. So it's crucial that you share that as you go along. Right. Here's a wonderful question that comes up on the chat. Should funding requests also include opportunities for professional development in order to maximize diversity in leadership, or should that already be in place? No. You let your funder know the kind of professional growth that you want to have in your organization. That comes with what we said about how are we going to build the capacity and the strength of our organization. So professional development can come in there, but that professional development must be aligned with the vision of your funder. You can't just go there and say, hey, listen, part of the professional development is I'm going to enroll for my master's degree. No, that's not professional development. That is personal, that's selfish, that's me. But if you say, part of this is going to be, we are going to take 6 of our young people and we're going to engage them in a training session around this particular project. And they will be acquiring the following skills. That is going to make a difference. Okay, here's another question. Is John Maxwell's 30-second rule effective? May you please briefly touch on the manner of approach during direct networking event prior to sending out your proposal? This is really important. This is something that we seldom do. That is, we write our proposals and we don't know who's receiving our proposals. Now, what I say, when I taught a course on arts management at Rhodes University to their postgrad students, I always said to them in the beginning of the year, I said, make it an objective to visit the website of one organization once a week, so that every week you're learning about a new organization. You're asking yourself, who's the head of that organization? What's their core objective? What kind of programs they're doing? And you begin to study that website. And then out of curiosity, you just, when they have that contents page, you just write a dear little question like, I visited your website. I really love the work you're doing. I would like to be added to your mailing list. You think you're going to be ignored? No. They send you the first newsletter. What do? Thank you for the newsletter. That was a really great, exciting program. I attended it. This is what my experience was. What are you doing? You're building a relationship with your organization, and you're making yourself completely visible all the time. So, sorry, I just want to put that slide up again. So that answers that question there, is that you have to know, become visible, become more than just a number, become a face, become a body, become a person, become somebody that is engaged with your partner as you go along. Okay, so we got to there. It's a two-way street. We require a full team. We said, sorry, I just want to clear this here. Yeah, that is, also have a sense of history, right? And people often ask me the question, why do you write things like on your Facebook page, this is the 40th anniversary of Ruth First? Or why do you write things like, in this year, South Africa celebrated or made a shift in its politics in this year? Because when you have a sense of history in your organization, you know where you're coming from. You're able to integrate that in your funding proposals. You're able to share that with your partner organizations. You'll understand where their history intersects with your history. And if there is that intersection, then there's a need for that organization and you to partner, to collaborate, to fund common projects and so forth. So having a sense of history is really, really crucial. Okay. Trust and not political correctness. And this for me is very important, is that if you're working with somebody, be honest, be engaging, don't be politically correct. Because once you work with me and I find that you're not being honest, you're just being politically correct, I'll snap you right out of there and I will not work with you again. Because political correctness is fickle. Trust, integrity is lasting. So in all your relationships with your funders, don't go for political correctness where they, they want us to have disability. We'll have some disabled person just to tick the box. Say, our building is not accessible to disabled people, and that's an infrastructural problem at the university, which is being addressed by the university's disability unit. But until such time that this is not addressed, we cannot accommodate a person in a wheelchair in our building. Not out of not wanting to, but because of the infrastructural challenges that we have. So you're not going to be politically correct, you're going to be honest. Okay? Partnership with ethics. Likewise, you engage ethically with every single funder. Don't damage the ethical relationship between you and funder, because once an ethical relationship is broken, it's impossible to mend it. Okay, attract your partners' audiences, and this is crucial. For example, when we did Poetry Africa, and we partnered with Hear My Voice, and we partnered with Amazwi, and we partnered with IFAS, and so forth. And when we were live streaming that, it wasn't just to our Poetry Africa audiences. We said, Hear My Voice, share it on your Facebook page. IFAS, share it on your Facebook page. Amazwi, share it on your Facebook page. Why? Because we're growing our audiences more than just that one organizational audience. But when you begin to share your audience and you grow your audiences, your next philanthropist is going to come out of your partner's audiences. Your next investor is going to come out of your partner's audiences. So always think about how you're growing and tapping into your funder or your partner's audiences as well. Partnerships are not always philanthropy. It's a business exchange. If somebody decides to take on a sponsor to further the artistic cause, but also you must be able to stand up against, they must be able to stand up against the core values. Its position must be defensible, right? So that if you, for example, give you an example, when Steve Hoffmeyer again, it wasn't just corporate sponsorship. It was a philanthropy. It was a real trade exchange. When Steve began to do the kind of racist statements, he always was a hit at Kaka & Ka. We could no longer present Steve Hoffmeyer because he would contradict the values of our organization. He would upset ABSA, who don't want to be identified with racists. He doesn't want to, Toyota doesn't want to be identified with him because every taxi driver in this country runs a Toyota. So that business relationship is really important. It's not always about philanthropy and things will hang around there. So partnerships require publicity. If your funder is not getting coverage, regardless of how that funder is, where or whatever, you are not going to sustain that funder. And even if it's a philanthropist, unless the philanthropist tells you we don't want any coverage, we want this to be anonymous, you don't breach that. But if a funder gives you a donation, a private funder, there's no reason why you can't give a shout out on your Facebook page and say, hey, we shout out to so-and-so because they've contributed a computer towards our learning center. That shout out gets shares, likes, and it allows other people to say, hey, I also have a computer desk that I can give to your organization or whatever. So publicity for funders, regardless of how big or small it is crucial, it's important. Partnerships and brand exposure. Understand, you dealt a workshop with brand identity and whatever. Identify how you establish those relationships between the brand identity of your organization and the brand identity of your funder and your partnerships. The first thing I said, partnerships are an art and a science, okay? You have to demonstrate how the organization will generate its own income streams to sustain its bureaucracy and its administration, because funders don't want to fund that. They don't want to fund your bureaucracy and administration. The funding grant will support the creative outputs. And you have to begin to think of research, catalysts, experimentation, monitoring, and quantifying accountants. Funding is an art in as much as it is a science. When you're dealing with the people thing, it's art. When you're dealing with the bureaucracy and the principles and all of that, it's science. Okay. Now, this for me is really important, is that you have to make your organization a human face. You can't just come up and say, oh, we're doing a project, so once a year we will do our Facebook page, will be alive and so forth. Your Facebook page must be alive throughout the year. It must share the kind of work. It must know who the people are. It must know who the partners are. It must be all these different kinds of things that you go and engage with and so forth. So think of it in a really, really creative way around how you're going to keep your organization identity, its face, its project alive throughout the year. How many times are people engaging on your social media pages? If they're only coming to you when you have a festival, then you don't have a human face, right? But if they're coming to you because you have multiple programs, if you are sharing other partners' work, sometimes as a Center for Creative Arts, we may not have anything on, but another poetry organization is having something on. Can we share that on our poster? What are we doing? We're allowing our audiences to know that we don't operate in isolation. We operate in this networked community of poets and poetry organizations and poetry festivals and so forth. We're alive, we're human. We're not just there when we come to you once every year, 10 days of the year to ask for money. Okay, how do you humanize your organization to shape the kind of program to attract partners, artists, audience, media, funders, critics, opponents? You have to have opponents as well, and other stakeholders. You reflect on these pillars we spoke about. How is it reflected in your artistic content? Is your content a dialogue between your organization and the stakeholders, or is it just a project? Think of your programs. How is it having a dialogue, a conversation with our stakeholders? You program to dialogue. You don't program to tick the box. You program to dialogue. The more your stakeholders are having a dialogue with you, the more engaged, the more invested, the more they want to fund and support what you're doing. So always think about that. Program to dialogue, not program to tick the box, not program because we have a project. Program to dialogue, okay? You have a greater social media voice. This is high maintenance. Social media is not easy. It's high maintenance, but it's the lowest cost partner that you have. If you go and engage a professional marketing person, you are going to pay anything between 15,000 rands to 150,000 rands for a marketing person to engage with your particular project. But if you develop the capacity of social media engagement within your organization, you will have a high maintenance partner who has to be maintained every single day, but at the lowest cost. Because why? We're doing it ourselves. So think of that as your greatest asset. Allow your partners to get in behind the scenes and inside the story. Not just come to the festival and see the festival. Tell them how it's developing, tell them how it's growing. Show them photographs from a rehearsal. Show them photographs from development. Show them after-party photographs. All these different kinds of things. Don't be embarrassed about the mistakes you make. Show that you can learn out of those mistakes. Begin to turn your mistakes into human-ish stories and grow from it. What we do as arts organizations, when we make mistakes, we try to cover it up and bury it. But we don't know that somebody has experienced that mistake and somebody is going to expose it. Now, rather than have somebody expose your mistake and let your funders then become aware of it, rather talk about your mistakes and say, we made a mistake, but this is what we learned from it. And this is what we're doing to remedy that. And this is the risk mitigation plan that we're going to put into place so that we don't make the same mistake again. Own the mistakes you make. And funders want you to do that. Own your mistakes, but show that you're learning from it, you're growing from it, you're building a risk mitigation plan, and you will not repeat that mistake. If you don't do that with your funder, you're likely to lose your funder, okay? Every partner has networks. Extend your work to reach their networks, and they will bring in new influence. It comes to what I told you about. You're getting this work done with 5 organizations. Each one of these 5 organizations have their own audiences, their own partners, and so forth. So by engaging with all of them, we are growing into the networks, into the audiences, and the relationships of all these 5 organizations. I'm going to take it there, but I want to lead you with one of the commensal questions that came from Abongile Aaron. And it's really important. And I think he says it in the most articulate way. Abongile says, we must stop looking at funding as a temporary meal ticket. We should look at it as an investment. And I agree with that 100%. You shouldn't look at funding as a temporary meal ticket or as, we have to do a funding proposal. We have to do a funding application. We have to again send in that. You have to look at funding as an investment. It's that how is it going to grow the work and the identity and the vision and the strategy of our organization? How is it going to become that real, make a difference in the way our partner engages and stays with us? So I'm going to leave it there, but I'd like to take some questions or comments or feedback from anyone in the group. This is your opportunity. Shall we do about 15 minutes of questions? If you have anything, show by hands and we can take it from there. Here's a question that comes up here. It says, if you have polarized stakeholders within your community, but a funder that is pushing specific and tangible product outcomes, how does dialogue exist without mediation? I think the first thing is that if you build a relationship over several years, over several months with your funder, you're not going to wait for that level of polarization to happen. You'll be sensitized to it as it's happening or as it's developing, and you'll engage with it there and there. If you've waited until it becomes polarized, that means you've lost the first principle. You've not built that relationship with them, which is an essential ingredient for growing and sustaining your funder partnerships. I see Luke's hand up. Luke, do you want to go ahead? And then I saw a hand from Ishmael. So Luke first, then we go to Ishmael.
Thanks, Ishmael. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation this evening. It's really quite exciting to sort of look at this from a different perspective. I'm just curious in terms of funding models that exist around NPOs and those kinds of organizations. If you yourself are an NPO or so not-for-profit or Section 21 or whatever the case may be, whatever your constitution is, how or what kind of funders are you trying to attract specifically? I mean, is there a profile that you should be targeting specifically, or does it rely largely upon your own brand identity going into that kind of space?
Sure. I don't think there's any one particular kind of funder. It comes to the first slide which we spoke about, is who is in your ecosystem. If you know who's in your ecosystem, you'll be able to know how to target them in different ways. So, for example, if I take the Center for Creative Arts, within our ecosystem is the university administration, it's the academics who contribute to our knowledge economy, it's the city council, it's the community organizations that we work with, it's the different businesses in our area. We've just completed the Durban International Film Festival. We got an in-kind sponsor, which was the Avalon Cinemas and Suncoast Cinema. But what that allows us to do is it allows us to be able to go to BASA and to apply for a matching grant for getting an in-kind sponsor. So you know, whether you're an educational institution, whether you're an NPO, whether you're a small organization working in the development sector, if you know who exists in your environment, your broad ecosystem, you will be able to know how you can target them at different levels. That from these partners, we will get in-kind stuff. From these partners, we get small donations. From these partners, we can get subscriptions. From these partners, we can get the once-a-year donation. From these partners, we can get CSI contribution towards our projects. I hope that answers your question, Luke. Shall we go to Ishmael? Go ahead, Ishmael.
Hi, Ishmael.
Hello.
So my question, right, I'd like you to please touch upon the importance of collaboration and in-kind partnerships, right? A good example is often when we have something going on, right, we do reach out to the Center for Creative Arts to say, look, you don't need to give us money. However, we are doing 1, 2, 3. How about we collaborate on this? Is there anything that you could contribute that is non-monetary, or to say that we have something going on and we then can contribute towards your platform through what we are doing at that particular time? How important is it to look beyond the actual funding and sponsorship in a monetary sense to say, here's money, do what you need to do, and the importance of, you know, actual collaboration and how that can actually even result in some huge benefits, not only for you, but then also for both organizations.
Super. Ishmael, I'm glad you used our two organizations as an example, because I'm going to refer to that specifically in my response. When we decided to collaborate, we didn't send an email to you out of the blue, and neither did you send an email to us out of the blue. If you recall, we met each other long before I even became the director of the Center for Creative Arts. I met you, I think it was in Midrand or somewhere around that particular area north of Johannesburg, at an event that was hosted by Heda of the Swiss Embassy. And you guys were one of the groups that were presenting there. And you made an impression on me at that particular time. So that when I came to the Poetry Africa Festival, I went, do you guys know this group, Hear My Voice? And yes, we do. Okay, somebody knows them. I think we need to chat. And then came the question where we began to talk to each other. And what we said to each other on numerous times is like, hey, we need to find ways of collaborating with each other. And that was the initial conversation. So it wasn't a proposal or a letter going to each other coldly. It was knowing a handshake. We shook hands. We knew each other first. We didn't even talk about collaborating when we met at that park. But what we did immediately is we connected in our headspaces and we remembered. We connected in our headspaces, we remembered, and we shook hands. And that shaking of hands was a bond. It meant sometime we will work together. And I think that was really important. So we ask ourselves the question, how often do we as arts people go to dinners, go to cocktail receptions, become audience members? How often are we connecting with somebody? If you connect with somebody, you become so much more easier to follow up with a proposal or a partnership strategy and so on. So if you come back to that thing which I said, I asked the Rhodes University students to do, that is once a week, visit a website of a arts organization and figure out, and then just write that letter. So that when you go to the market theater the next time and you see, there's that person, all you do is, up to this point, you've been a name on an email, you've been corresponding. You go, hey, you and I have been chatting over emails. I was the one who's shake hands. The person likes you, they connect with you. That's a bond, you stay in the headspace. The next thing is, now you know who I am. Now I know who you are. I know the faces, I know the mood, I know the temperament, I know the body language. I can connect with you at a different level. So funding partnerships, funding relationships are more than just clinical paperwork. Funding relationship, the spark, rests in how you're going to make this real connection with people. And when I worked at the National Arts Festival in Grahamstown, I'll give you an example. I worked, for example, with a project with the Argentinian ambassador. And well, the Argentinian ambassador loved what we did and we had a wonderful relationship. And he then said to me, I'm going to host a lunch at my home where I'm going to invite every ambassador from Latin America for you to come and do a presentation at the festival. And that was magnificent. That's what I wanted. I wanted my funder to open doors for me. But of course, the responsibility rests on me is how am I going to sell and target to the rest of that Latin American community of ambassadors? To begin to understand that as a festival, I know that a small country like Paraguay and Uruguay don't have the same amount of money there, so I'm not going to expect that kind of funding relationship. But what is that can do that still allows us to partner? Can I ask you to fund a filmmaker, something small that you can afford, and so forth? So that connection, the handshake is really important. So use our example of the way we connected, Ismail, as the way you build. It's people to people. It's not email to email, clinical face, and we don't know who the people are. It's about connecting with who the people are. Okay, let's go to Mandy Vundla. I see you there.
Hi, Praesh. So I have a question. I have a question about receiving funding from an organization that doesn't align with you in your values. So I've seen NGOs do this where they, I don't know whether contractually there's some disclaimer to say, hey, we don't support what you do, da, 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 da. So if I have somebody up my alley and they're like, and there's an opportunity, right? But I'm just like, oh, I want your money, but I don't know if I want to shake hands with you and your values. How do you navigate that?
No, that's a massive problem. That's when you don't even take the money and you don't even establish that partnership. Because if there's a conflict in your values, you and your funder are bound to hit heads. But also, you and your funder are probably going to end up having such a massive fight at some point that it's going to have ripple effects on any other funder that may want to engage with you. And to give you an example, I think it's about I'm now 4 years here, 5 years there. About 15 years ago, when I worked at the National Arts Festival, we got an alcohol company that wanted to partner with us around a particular project. But we had to take a critical discussion. We had to ask ourselves, do we engage with that alcohol company for that particular project? Our audience base for that particular project is youth. Do we want to have an alcohol brand around what is a youth program? So thank you, no thank you. So I think you need to know when a funder's brand is going to do damage to your reputation, and you say, I'd rather not touch that fund. I could go to that partner for something else. And you begin to not just go no, you get into your boardroom and you get into the creative space with your team leaders, and you say, we definitely can't partner on that particular project. But if we want their money, what alternative project can we create for a different kind of an audience, a different kind of strategy, and still target that funding? Do you understand it, Mandy? But don't,
yes, got you.
You can never put a disclaimer. We're partnering with you, but, oh,
yeah.
wow, that's dangerous. If you partner with me and you're partnering with the CCA, but Ismail is a football. I'm not going to find you. I'll cut you off my database right away. Right. So you have to begin to understand that. Okay, you can't have disclaimers in your relationship with funders. No.
Okay.
Impossible.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Super. Great. Are there any last questions before we round off? Thank you very much. I'm not sure who this comment is from, but it says Cameroon. Greetings from Cameroon. It's such a pleasure to be here again. The session has been quite enriching. There are so many things we do out of ignorance. Thanks to the presentation, I've seen the lapses. I had leave from here with many lessons to implement in my activities that seek to grow. Thank you very much. Please repeat about BASA. How do you get them to give you a grant when you have a corporate sponsorship, when you get a donation of 5,000 from Spar Supermarket? You're asking that question at the very right time, because right now BASA has pulled out a call for intent. What this means is that they are asking organizations, are you intending to get corporate sponsorship? So go to the BASA website. You'll see that call out for intent and read it and answer and see whether you are going to get a corporate sponsor and whether you can then secure that corporate sponsor and go to BASA and say, we've got a corporate sponsor. We would like you to have this grant for us. I hope that answers the question. I think it's from Celestine. Cornelia, I see your hand up.
Yes, so I have a question. In terms of like when you get corporate funding, in terms of if you do not meet the returns of investment, does the financial liability fall back on the artist, or is that usually within the contract itself?
No, it's if you have liability, if you don't meet up with the agreements of your contract, it's not liability for the artist, it's liability of who signs the contract. And very often that liability could go to the organization, or it go to the individual within the organization, is if you don't have a proper legal structure within your organization. So to give you an example with the CCA, for example, although I'm the delegated head of the CCA and I can enter into partnership agreements and I can do whatever kind of thing, ultimately, the person who has signed the contract on behalf of the CCA is not me, it's not Siphindile, it is the registrar of the university. And that is because all our contracts at the CCA gets vetted by our legal department to ensure that in no way will this partnership compromise the university in any way. And not in any way are we as a CCA entering into a funding agreement that is against the values of the university. So the organization will hold you, not the artists we work with. So if we don't deliver, it's not the artists who we've worked with that will be liable. It's the organization. Yeah. So you have to begin to understand that. No, Lutado, thank you very much for your feedback and your comment. There's a lot of questions around funding, and this is why we said we're going to do this as a two-part workshop today and tomorrow. So today what we've done is go over the broad overview of funding and the kind of general things that you need to understand and what is it that works in the underground, what is in the deeper end, what is in the belly of the beast. So tomorrow we get into the real outer things. We talk about the funding proposal, we talk about the contract, we talk about the SB4 forms, we talk about your SARS form, we talk about your bank details and why you need to renew it every 3 months and make sure you have an updated letter. We talk about the delegation of authority. We'll talk about the nitty-gritties tomorrow in the workshop, and Siphindile will take us through with some very practical examples, and I will be sitting in the chat box sharing notes and questions and things that come with her. But for that, I want to thank all of you for your participation. I want to thank you for your engagement. I want to thank you for giving us your ears. I want to thank you mostly for your passion as arts people, because it's your work that keeps us as arts administrators alive. But more than anything else, I want to thank the partnership that we have as the Center for Creative Arts through Poetry Africa, with Hear My Voice, with Kakaza as an incredibly smart, savvy administrator and project leader. And I'll thank our partners, the Goethe-Institut, the French Institute of South Africa, the Wallonie-Bruxelles, and the Representation of Flanders, and the EU Collective for sharing our vision, for sharing our passion, and for creating an enabling space for us to be able to grow as arts people who can begin to make a difference to our community. With that, I'm going to close this session and thank you all and wish you all well. And we look forward to engaging with you tomorrow in part 2 of this workshop on funding and funding processes and relationships. But before you leave, I want to direct you to the bottom of your screen. You'll see that it starts with mute, stop, security, participants, chat, share screen, polls, quiz. It's on the screen there. We'd like you to just go to that poll and to be able to answer the questions that you have there in either strongly agree, you're neutral about it, you disagree, or you strongly disagree. My understanding of funding planning is improved because of this workshop. Yes, strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. You go to, there's 3 questions, and we really will be grateful if you can answer the 3 questions, because it allows us to be able to assess the work we do, but more than anything else, it allows us to be able to plan future workshops and what we need to focus on and how we need to take them into our planning as we go along. So please don't see that as just another slappy thing I have to do. See that as an essential part of the way in which you want to grow the kind of programming that we do. Remember what we said, it's dialogue, it's two-way. You've been listening, now we're going to listen to you, we're going to hear from you whether it worked for you or didn't work from you, and so forth. Okay, so once you've done the poll, consider that the end, and thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening. See you tomorrow, same time, same space, and we look forward to engaging with you. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye-bye.
Bye.